Hey, what's up guys, Joshua's Boosters here and welcome back to another One Piece video. Today I'm trying something pretty different. No gameplay, just a true deep dive analysis into one of the most broken cards coming out in OP11 and what makes it as good as it is. You might know him as Blue Purple Luffy, UP Luffy, but I prefer to just call him Snakeman, and I will be doing so for the remainder of the video. So, when this leader was announced, I remember my friends saying, we will need to see what kind of support it gets on release to see if it's good. But I knew from the get-go this leader was going to be like a huge presence in the OP11 meta. And I will be going over why I immediately knew and why that is. So in this video I will be taking an in-depth look at why this leader is as strong as it is. But to really evaluate if a card is strong, we first need to establish a baseline. Because without being able to compare this to other leaders, it's after all pretty hard to judge whether like a leader is good or not. So let's first take a look at how Bandai has been balancing leaders up till now. And let me preface this by saying I think they've done a phenomenal job establishing this baseline and mostly sticking to it. Only once before I really think they made a basic designing mistake when moving away from their core principles, which oddly enough actually was Edward Newgate, Whitebeard himself, and not even Sakazuki or RP Law, even though those leads were obviously also broken, but for like different reasons. So there's a few rules that Bandai has been holding onto since the start of the game. Firstly, the most generic leader I would say is the monocolor 5k leader that has 5 lives. Prime examples of this would be OP01 Roronoa Zoro, Useless Captain Kid, or OP03 Rob Lucci, or OP07 Rob Lucci. This is the base stat line pretty much the entire game is based around. So it's important to realize that almost all the character stats are based around the fact that almost every leader has the 5k power stat. Then the second type of leader, which was introduced in OP01, right away is the dual color leader. So this leader also carries a 5000 power, however it only has 4 life, compared to the 5 life of the monocolor leaders. So why did Bandai decide to give these leaders less life than the monocolor leaders? Because they have access to a bigger card pool when deck building, of course. In practice, we very often see that this one less life makes a huge difference, because this means that throughout the game, you will see one less card to play with, and you can also take one less attack before losing the game. To mitigate this, we often saw that for a dual color leader to be meta viable, his effect has to be very strong. So examples of this would be Red-Green Law, Blue-Black Sakazuki, or Black-Yellow Luffy. Early on in the game, I already talked about it a little bit, they also introduced Whitebeard, or Edward Newgate. This was a monocolor leader with 6k power as well as 6 life cards, which immediately kind of broke the game. Why? Because this leader not only required more Dawn investment to deal damage, but also had access to an additional card throughout the game. Even with his ability being like a downside, having to take a life every turn, just the fact that he had his superior stat line and an extra card made him the most dominant deck for multiple formats in a row, until he had to be banned. Then Bandai later revisited the 6k leaders in RP Luffy, but by this time they figured out like a pretty good balancing tool. This was a dual color leader, which means he would usually have 4 life. However, since this is also a 6k leader, they essentially traded the additional 1000 power for another life, meaning this was a dual color 6 power 3 life leader. This deck performed pretty well in the format, but it wasn't like a menace like Whitebeard was. For the sheer fact that he can only take 3 hits before losing the game, as well as this leader essentially sees 2 less cards than the traditional monocolor leaders like Zoro, for example. Of course, there have been balanced exceptions to this rule as well. Think of like an NL or a Vegapunk. Those really don't follow the traditionally established rules for balancing leaders, but they still played a fair game compared to all the other leaders in the game. Now, with all this being established, let's finally take a look at Snakeman, and how we can tell this leader is broken, even without taking into account any of the support cards. Why is this leader so broken? When he follows the leader design rules that were previously considered fair with RP Luffy entering the game. Yes, Snakeman can only take 3 hits before losing the game, and yes, he only has 3 life. However, Snakeman does not see 2 less cards throughout the game than the regular monocolor leaders. Or 1 less than the dual color leaders, I suppose. In fact, Snakeman sees more cards than these leaders. Because after hitting a Don, like going into the 10 Don turn, Snakeman is essentially going to be drawing an additional card each turn. Just this by itself means that when we're hitting the late game, Snakeman only needs 2 turns to equal out the card advantage with just the regular monocolor 5k leaders. While Snakeman has access to a bigger card pool because it's dual color, and it has the massive advantage of being a 6k leader. And fact is, with most decks in the game, you will get to this point. That's without even mentioning that you are not just drawing like an additional card per turn, but you also get to choose which 2 cards you will be drawing and like stacking your top deck, right? Which is absolutely insane. At this point, I haven't even mentioned that Snakeman is a purple leader. Purple-blue. Which means it has access to ramp cards that make him reach his late game even faster. Which means that you get to this point of seeing more cards than your opponents, usually 1 turn sooner than I actually previously mentioned. Just keeping all these things in mind, you can already tell this is an exceptionally strong leader. But then all of this is topped off with it being able to play the most well-supported archetype in the game, the Straw Hat archetype. Which means it has consistent, powerful engine, as well as access to another one of the most broken cards in the game, Gum Gum Giant. Maybe do a card analysis video on Giant next? Let me know in the comments. Being able to search for the 9k not the 9k, but the 9 cost Sanji. I suppose it's actually also 9k, but the 9 cost Sanji also allows him to not just gain advantage in hand, but also have a commanding presence on the board. I want to point out that 9 cost Big Mom also synergizes extremely well with this leader, because having access to her also means that Snakeman has like a more reliable chance to reach the late game, because of the ability to gain an additional life. The longer the game goes on, the more advantage this leader can get access to. Since there is no leader in the game that can compete with Snakeman in the late game, which causes the weakness of this leader being dashed that just disable him from reaching the gate game altogether. For example, Rowena Zoro or Bello Betty. So, yeah, that's it. Just kind of a deep dive into Snakeman purely from a card design standpoint. And I really like to do like these mini video essays in the future as well. I'd love to go over more cards like this and really deep dive into why certain cards specifically are so powerful when you take like more of a macro look at the design of the One Piece trading card game. So please let me know like what other cards you would like to see me discuss, as well as if you even enjoy this type of video and content at all. If you don't, I'd also love to hear that feedback, because it's just something I'm trying out at the moment. So yeah, leave a comment, also leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and if you do, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!